Girl vanished from her living room in 1998. 16 years later, her brother cuts open her teddy bear. The phone rang in the middle of the night, slicing through the quiet of Ethan Keller's small farmhouse like a knife. He'd just closed his eyes, the weight of the past 2 decades pressing heavy on his chest. But he knew the voice before it even spoke. "You're not going to like this." Ethan Sheriff Ellie Mazer said, her voice low and tight, with a kind of urgency that grabbed him by the throat. "We found her." For a long moment there was nothing but static in the silence. Ethan's breath caught in his chest as the words tried to land, tried to make sense of what had been buried for years. His sister, the one who'd vanished without a trace all those years ago, the one he couldn't forget, the one he couldn't leave behind, the one he couldn't save. It was a town forgotten by time, tucked away in the rolling hills of southern Missouri. Birch Hollow didn't have much to offer the modern world. The streets were winding and cracked, the businesses long closed or abandoned. There was one main road that led in, and the same road that led out if you were lucky enough to find your way. Ethan Keller was born here, raised here, and despite all the years that had passed, Birch Hollow was still the first place he thought of when things went wrong. The town, with its sagging porches and moss-covered oak trees, felt as if it had been swallowed by the earth, never quite fitting into the present, yet never completely leaving the past behind. He could remember it well, the day his sister Hannah was taken. It was a summer afternoon, the kind that hung heavy in the air, sweat trickling down the back of your neck, the cicadas buzzing louder than any conversation. He was sitting in the old wooden swing on the porch of their childhood home when his mother called out to him, "Ethan, where's your sister?" Ethan had been 10 at the time. He'd gone inside to grab a snack after playing in the field behind the house. But when he came back out, Hannah was gone. The sky, once bright and blue, had turned to a dull gray as Ethan searched the house, the yard, and the woods nearby. By the time their parents had noticed she was missing, it was too late. The town searched for weeks, knocking on doors, following leads, checking the creek, the abandoned barn by the tracks, even the caves up on Birch Hill. But there was no sign of her. The authorities called it a freak disappearance, a child wandering off lost in the woods. But Ethan knew better. He'd heard things, seen things, whispers in the dark that didn't make any sense at the time. It wasn't an accident. It wasn't a case of her running away. There was something darker in Birch Hollow, something the sheriff wasn't talking about. And Ethan had been too young to understand it then, but not anymore. It was years before the town of Birch Hollow saw the Keller family again. Ethan's father had died shortly after Hannah disappeared, leaving Ethan and his mother to face the years that followed. His mother never recovered her mind, slipping into a kind of quiet madness. Every year on the anniversary of Hannah's disappearance, she'd put on the same old worn-out dress and stand at the edge of the woods, calling Hannah's name into the wind. It was a ritual, a kind of grieving that never ended. Ethan, too, was marked by that loss. He couldn't let go of the image of his sister's bright blue eyes, the way she used to clutch her stuffed bear close to her chest when she was scared. He couldn't shake the feeling that something was waiting for him in the woods, something tied to the old family home, something that had been buried in the soil of Birch Hollow for years. When Ethan left for the city, he thought he could leave the past behind. But it wasn't long before he was back. At 30, he found himself standing once more at the edge of the town, staring at the same old farmhouse, his hands trembling at the sight of the overgrown yard. The house was abandoned now, the windows boarded up, the roof sagging under the weight of neglect. But it was home, and it was calling him back. Ethan didn't know what he was looking for, only that he had to find it. The mystery of Hannah's disappearance had gnawed at him for years, an unanswered question that wouldn't leave him in peace. He'd tried to move on, tried to make a life for himself in the city, but Birch Hollow had a hold on him, something deeper than blood, something older than memories. That night when Sheriff Ellie Mazer called, Ethan knew something had changed. He knew that the mystery, the thing he had spent his entire life chasing, was about to come to an end, and he didn't know if he was ready for it. Ellie Mazer had been the sheriff of Birch Hollow since Ethan was a boy. She had a sharp mind and an even sharper tongue, and she was one of the few people who had always believed that there was more to Hannah's disappearance than the town wanted to admit. She had never given up on the case, even as the years passed and the search for Hannah went cold. And now it seemed, after all these years, she was ready to bring Ethan back into the fold. "We found her," Ethan Ellie had said. "We found something anyway, and it's not good." Ethan felt a rush of adrenaline as his pulse quickened. His fingers curled into a fist, his knuckles white. He hadn't expected this, not after so long, not after everyone else had given up. Where was all he could manage to say? Ellie paused for a moment, her voice hushed. "Up on Birch Hill, in the old shack, the one they say no one ever goes near." The next morning, Ethan drove to Birch Hollow in the same old truck he had driven as a teenager. His mind raced, filled with memories of his sister and the twisted thoughts that had followed him for years. He couldn't help but wonder, had she been alive all this time? Had she been hidden away, locked in some forgotten corner of the town? Or was this just another dead end, another empty promise that would leave him with more questions than answers? Birch Hill was as wild and untamed as it had always been. The road leading up the hill was overgrown, the trees on either side leaning in like they were closing in on him. The shack that stood at the top was little more than a broken-down shell, its wooden planks rotting under years of neglect. It had always been there, a dark silhouette in the distance, but no one ever dared go near it. The town's elders used to tell stories about it, stories of bad things happening to anyone who ventured too close. But those stories were just rumors, warnings. And now, for the first time in 20 years, the truth was about to come to light. Ethan parked his truck at the base of the hill, the mist swirling around him. He could feel the weight of the years pressing on him, the silence of the town pressing in like a shroud. He stepped out his boots, crunching on the gravel, and looked up at the shack. It was time to face whatever had been waiting there for all these years. As he walked toward it, he couldn't shake the feeling that he wasn't alone. It was the same feeling he'd had as a child, like someone was watching him from the shadows. Someone who knew more than they were letting on. Someone who had been waiting for this moment, just as he had. The mystery of Hannah Keller's disappearance wasn't over. In fact, it was just beginning. The shack loomed like a specter in the mist, its silhouette faint and flickering, as if it might vanish with the next gust of wind. Ethan Keller stood at the base of the hill, his heart pounding in his chest, his breath shallow against the damp air. The fog clung to the trees like a shroud, and the world around him felt suspended in time, as though the past were pressing against the present, threatening to break through. He hadn't set foot in Birch Hollow in over a decade, not since he left for the city, desperate to outrun the memories of his sister's disappearance. But now, standing at the edge of the town, he felt that familiar weight on his chest, the same heaviness that had plagued him since the day Hannah vanished. His eyes traced the broken silhouette of the shack. Birch Hill had always been a place of rumors and warnings, tales of strange lights at night, of shadows that moved when no one was looking. Old-timers swore that the hill was cursed, that bad things happened to those who ventured too close. It was a superstition passed down through the generations that had kept the town's children at bay, but Ethan had never believed it, not until now. Ellie Mazur's call echoed in his mind. "We found something, Ethan. Up on Birch Hill. The old shack. It's her, his sister. After all these years." He couldn't quite wrap his mind around it. Hannah had been gone for 16 years. The search had ended long ago. There were no more posters with her face on them, no more whispers in town, no more hope. But Ellie had found something that called him back to Birch Hollow, back to the place he thought he had left behind. He wiped the sweat from his brow, squared his shoulders, and began the slow, careful climb up the hill. Birch Hollow in the early days. Ethan's mind wandered as he ascended the hill, the memories of his childhood rising unbidden. He had been young when Hannah disappeared, just a boy of 10. He remembered playing in the creek behind the house, catching frogs and skipping stones, the sound of her laughter filling the air like music. She had always been full of life, full of questions, full of curiosity. She had been his little sister, and they had been inseparable. Their parents were good people, but distant. Their father worked long hours at the sawmill, and their mother had always been fragile. The loss of Hannah had nearly destroyed her. Ethan's father had never fully recovered from it either. The man who had been his hero, the strong, silent type, had withered away after Hannah's disappearance, drinking himself into a stupor until he was nothing but a shadow of the man Ethan had once known. It wasn't just the physical absence of his sister that tore at Ethan. It was the empty space she had left behind, the quiet, the stillness, the unanswered questions. Why had she disappeared? Had she run away? Had someone taken her? There had been so many theories, so many possible answers, that the search had become a circus, with people pointing fingers, accusing each other, and then walking away with nothing. But Ethan had never walked away. He couldn't, and now he was back. The shack. Ethan reached the top of the hill, his boots crunching against the damp earth. The shack was just as he remembered it, crumbling, forgotten, and decayed. The wooden planks were warped, the roof sagging under the weight of years of neglect. Vines crawled up the sides like fingers gripping the structure with a cold, unyielding force. It was the kind of place that made your skin crawl, that made you wonder how it had survived for so long. He glanced around, feeling the hairs on the back of his neck stand up. The hill was quiet, too quiet. The only sound was the wind rustling the trees, the occasional bird calling in the distance. For a moment Ethan thought he saw a shadow flit across the broken window of the shack. His pulse quickened, but he shook it off. It was just the fog playing tricks on his mind. He reached the door of the shack, its wooden frame, rotting, barely hanging on. The old padlock was still there, rusted and ancient, but the door was slightly ajar. Ellie had mentioned it was unlocked when they found it. That didn't make sense. If this place had been abandoned for years, why was the door open now? Ethan hesitated for only a moment, then pushed the door open, the hinges creaking with a groan that echoed through the empty hill. The air inside was stale, thick with dust and the scent of mildew. His flashlight cut through the darkness, illuminating the remnants of old furniture, a broken chair, a chipped table, piles of forgotten belongings. But it wasn't the furniture that caught his attention. It was the smell. It was faint but unmistakable, a faint scent of decay mingling with the dampness of the earth. Ethan's stomach twisted. He moved deeper into the shack, the floorboards creaking underfoot, his heart pounding in his chest. The flashlight beam flickered as his mind raced. What had they found? He stepped over the broken boards, his boots scraping against the dirt. The beam of his flashlight swept across the far wall, and then he saw it. There in the corner, sitting on an old mattress, was a figure. A small figure hunched over, rocking slightly. Her back was to him, her hair long and tangled, her clothes ragged and torn. Ethan's breath caught in his throat. He knew that shape. He knew that profile. His sister, Hannah. He whispered the word, tasting strange on his tongue after all these years. His voice cracked as the weight of the moment hit him. The figure didn't move, didn't acknowledge him. Ethan's heart hammered in his chest. Hannah, it's me. It's Ethan. Still nothing. Not even a twitch. The silence stretched on. The room seemed to close in around him, the walls pressing in, suffocating him. He took a tentative step forward, his eyes locked on the girl in the corner. She was so still, so silent. But something in his gut told him this wasn't right. This wasn't the Hannah he remembered. The girl who had disappeared all those years ago. No, this was something else, something broken, something lost. His hand reached out trembling as he took another step. And then he saw it. A flash of something on the floor, something small, something familiar. The worn, frayed edges of a stuffed bear. The same bear that Hannah had carried with her everywhere. The one that had been missing the day she vanished. The bear was there, nestled against her leg, just as it had been all those years ago. The tears welled up in Ethan's eyes as he took one last step. This was it. This was the moment he had been waiting for. The truth, the answer. But when he finally reached her, When he touched her shoulder, the figure stiffened and a chill ran through his veins. It wasn't Hannah. The girl looked up at him, her eyes empty and hollow. There was nothing behind them, no recognition, no warmth. Just cold, lifeless space. Ethan's world tilted, his breath caught in his throat as the flashlight slipped from his hand, falling to the floor with a dull thud. Ethan's heart thudded in his chest like a drum, the silence around him deafening. The girl before him was a shell of someone he once knew, but she wasn't Hannah. Not the sister he remembered, bright-eyed, mischievous, and full of life. No, this girl was broken, hollowed out, her gaze empty, as though the life had been drained from her long ago. He swallowed hard, his throat tight. "Hannah," he whispered again, voice trembling as his fingers brushed against her shoulder. She didn't react, not even a flinch. The faint glow from his flashlight caught her in the starkest light, highlighting the gauntness of her face, the tattered remnants of her clothes. She seemed so small, so fragile. His mind spun, confusion overwhelming him. What had happened here? How had she ended up like this? And who was she really? The girl's hand twitched slightly, her fingers grazing the bear that lay at her feet. Ethan's eyes darted to it, his breath catching. The bear. It was the same one. The faded pink thread, the stitched name Hannah. It was impossible. This couldn't be happening. It's her, he thought, though. Doubt gnawed at the edge of his mind. But then why does she look like this? He crouched down slowly, his knees creaking in protest, his eyes locked on the girl's vacant expression. "Hannah, can you hear me?" His voice was soft, but the words hung in the air like fragile glass, threatening to shatter. The girl didn't answer. She didn't speak at all. Ethan reached for the bear, gently pulling it from her grasp. Her fingers twitched, but she made no move to stop him. The fabric was worn, its stitches unraveling in places, and he could almost feel the weight of the years that had passed since he had last seen it. It was like touching a piece of the past, a fragment of the life they had lost. The girl's lips parted, a faint breath, escaping as though she were trying to speak, but nothing came out. Ethan froze. She's trying to remember. He could see it in the way her brow furrowed, the way her fingers brushed the bear, as though it were a lifeline. "Hannah, please. You have to remember me. I'm Ethan, your brother." Still nothing. Her eyes flickered briefly toward him, but they didn't quite focus, drifting past him, as if she were looking through him. The hope that had surged in Ethan's chest moments earlier began to fade, replaced by a growing dread. She wasn't just silent, she was distant, and that distance was growing. In the back of his mind, a nagging thought began to creep up. What if she's not the same person at all? His hands clenched into fists, his heart pounding as he struggled to process the surreal scene before him. The girl before him had Hannah's face, but everything else was wrong. Her eyes were too empty, her skin too pale. She wasn't the little girl who had once trusted him, who had once clung to him for comfort. This was someone else. Ethan forced himself to stand, backing away a few steps as his mind raced. Could this be some sort of trap? Was this a sick game? Had someone placed this girl here to toy with him? Or worse, had she been manipulated in some way? He didn't know. All he knew was that this wasn't the reunion he had dreamed about for years. As he stumbled backward, a soft sound interrupted the silence. A faint click, then another. Ethan's gaze snapped to the floor where his flashlight had fallen. It had shifted slightly, its beam now pointing toward the far wall. A shadow moved too quick for his mind to process. The room felt colder, the air heavier, and a creeping sense of unease settled over him like a blanket. Something's wrong. Something's wrong here. The faint clicking sound came again, followed by the unmistakable sound of footsteps from behind him. Ethan's body tensed, and his instincts screamed at him to turn to flee, but his feet felt as if they were glued to the floor. He knew the danger was near, but he couldn't pinpoint it. Before he could move, a low voice rasped from behind him, thick with a dark, menacing edge. "Thought you'd find her, huh?" Ethan's blood ran cold, his entire body freezing in place. He didn't need to turn around to know who it was. The voice, gravelly filled with venom, was unmistakable. Alan, the man who had been at the center of so many rumors in Birch Hollow. The man who had disappeared with Hannah all those years ago. Ethan had never forgotten him, not for a single day. He was the shadow in their lives, the one who had stolen his sister and broken everything in his world. Ethan's breath hitched in his chest, his pulse hammering in his ears as the sound of boots scuffing against the dirt floor reached him. He couldn't see Alan yet, but he didn't need to. He could feel the malevolent presence drawing closer, a suffocating weight in the room. "Get away from her," Ethan hissed, his voice shaking but determined. His hand instinctively reached for the gun at his waist, but it wasn't there. He had left it in the truck, the rush of his discovery overriding everything else. "Don't worry," Alan sneered, his voice low and mocking. "She's not going anywhere." The words cut through the air like a knife, and Ethan's mind snapped back into focus. Alan wasn't just here, he had been waiting, watching, and now he was too close, too dangerous. Ethan's eyes flicked back to the girl in the corner, Hannah, or the ghost of her. "Why, Ethan?" demanded, his voice rising. "Why did you do this to her?" To me, Alan's laughter echoed in the room, cruel and cold. "It's not your sister you should be worried about," he spat. "It's everything else. Everything that's been buried here for all these years." Ethan's heart sank. The air felt thick, suffocating. It was as if the walls were closing in, pressing in on him, on everything he had ever thought he understood. Nothing made sense anymore. Suddenly the girl Hannah shifted. Her fingers, once limp, now moved, ever so slightly, brushing the fabric of her shirt. A glimmer of recognition passed across her face, but it was fleeting, like a dream, slipping away as soon as you tried to hold on to it. Ethan's breath caught in his throat. "Please," he whispered, voice hoarse. "Please come back to me, please." But it was too late. The air was thick with danger now. And as Alan's shadow loomed closer, a single truth settled into Ethan's chest like a stone. No one was ever going to leave Birch Hollow, not really. Ethan's heart pounded in his chest as the words Alan had just spat echoed in his mind. "It's not your sister you should be worried about." The words wrapped themselves around his skull, squeezing, suffocating. He knew Alan. The man had haunted his childhood, a shadow whose mere presence was enough to stir up the past. But this felt different, more dangerous, more real. Ethan's eyes flicked back to the girl in the corner. Hannah, he thought, but even as the name formed in his mind, he knew it was a lie. This wasn't the girl he had once known. This wasn't his sister, not in any way he could recognize. The girl's face, pale, vacant, far too thin, didn't hold the spark of life that had once made her so her. She was a hollow shell. The crushing weight of the moment pressed in on him. His hands clenched into fists at his sides. This isn't how it was supposed to be. She was supposed to come home. And yet here she was, broken, damaged, locked in a cage of her own mind. How had it come to this? What had Alan done to her? What had they both been through? His thoughts were interrupted as Alan stepped fully into the room, his boots scraping the floor, sending a ripple of dread down Ethan's spine. Ethan turned slowly, his eyes narrowing as he faced the man who had been responsible for so much pain. The man who had taken his sister, his little sister, and disappeared into the shadows of the world. Alan was different than Ethan remembered. Time had weathered him, turned his hair to a dirty gray, and his face to something more monstrous, something twisted by years of violence and malice. But his eyes, the eyes that had once glinted with a predator's hunger, still burned with that same cold, calculating fury. His smile was thin, sickening. "Did you really think you could just come here and take her back?" Alan's voice was low, menacing, full of that familiar venom. "She's mine, always has been, and you're just too late." Ethan took a step forward, his jaw set, but his heart was thudding in his chest. "You've come too far to turn back now," he told himself. There was no way he would let Alan win. Not after everything. Not when Hannah was so close, even if she wasn't the person she had been. "She's not yours, Alan." Ethan spat, his voice thick with anger. "She's my sister. You can't keep her locked up like this. I'm taking her with me." Alan's lips twisted into a cruel smirk, but there was something darker behind it. "You think you're in control here," he sneered. "You think you can waltz in and change everything. The past doesn't work like that, boy. You don't just get to erase it." He took a step closer, looming over Ethan. "And you certainly don't get to take her from me." Ethan could feel the tension in the air, thick like smoke. The room was so suffocating that for a moment he wasn't sure if he could breathe, but he couldn't back down. Not now. "No," Ethan said, his voice cutting through the silence like a blade. "I'm not going to let you do this anymore. It's over, Alan. This place, this whole twisted little life you've built, it's done." Alan's eyes narrowed. "You think it's that simple?" he growled, taking another step forward. "You think you're going to fix things? You've already failed, boy. Just like you always do." Ethan's chest tightened. He wanted to lash out. He wanted to hurt this man, the one who had stolen his sister and left him with nothing but an aching hole in his heart. But more than that, he wanted answers. He needed to know what had happened to her. What had Alan done to turn his little sister into this broken, empty shell? "Why, Alan," Ethan demanded, "what did you do to her? What happened to my sister?" Alan laughed low, cruel, like the sound of gravel grinding underfoot. "What happened to her?" he repeated almost mockingly. "She's still the same girl. She's just learned her place." His voice dropped to a whisper, dark and dangerous. "You don't get it, do you? This world, this life, it's not for the weak. Your sister, she was weak. She couldn't survive out there. But I taught her. I gave her what she needed, and now she's mine. She's safe." Ethan's blood ran cold. Safe. This was what Alan considered safety, keeping her locked away, broken, stripped of everything that had once made her human. "No," Ethan said firmly, shaking his head. "This isn't safety. This is hell." Alan took a long, deliberate step back, his eyes glinting with amusement. "Hell, you think this is hell?" He chuckled darkly. "No. Hell is what you don't understand. It's the things you can't see. It's the secrets buried beneath the surface." His gaze flicked to the girl in the corner, her vacant eyes still locked on the bear in her hands. "You don't know what she's been through. You don't know what I've done to make her—" He trailed off, his expression darkening. Ethan's mind raced. What does he mean by that? What could he have done to her? He turned his gaze back to Hannah. She still hadn't moved, still hadn't responded, but he could see a flicker of something behind her eyes. A glimmer, as if for just a moment she was there again. The sister he had lost. "Come on, kid," Ethan whispered, his voice hoarse. "It's me. It's Ethan. I'm here. You don't have to stay here. We can leave this place. We can go home." But Alan wasn't finished. His voice was colder now, more sinister. "You think she'll remember you after all this time? After everything I've done to make her forget? No, Ethan. She's mine now. You can't take her back." Ethan's pulse quickened. He had to do something. He couldn't leave without her. Not now, not after coming so far. But how? How could he break through whatever Alan had done to her? How could he wake her from the fog of whatever twisted world Alan had kept her in for so long? Before he could act, Alan lunged at him. But Ethan was faster. He stepped to the side, avoiding the attack, and grabbed the flashlight from the floor. He swung it hard at Alan's face. The light hit him squarely in the forehead, knocking him back. Alan stumbled, growling, but before he could regain his footing, Ethan grabbed Hannah by the wrist and yanked her toward him. "Come on," he muttered, his grip tight around her arm. "Come on, Hannah, we're leaving." But as he pulled her toward the door, the weight of the world seemed to close in. There was no escaping this place, no escaping Alan. The door opened with a creak, and as Ethan pushed Hannah toward the exit, a final truth settled into his bones. It wasn't just Alan they had to escape from. It was everything this place had made them into. And for the first time in years, Ethan realized there might be no coming back from it. Ethan's fingers tightened around Hannah's wrist as he tugged her toward the door. The air in the shack felt heavy, oppressive. Every creak of the floorboard beneath their feet, every shallow breath from Hannah seemed to echo, amplifying the tension in the space. Alan was right behind them, his voice low, cruel, a snake slithering through the air. "You can't escape her? Not from me? Not from this," Alan sneered, his boots scraping the floor as he moved closer. But Ethan couldn't stop now. Not when they were this close. The exit was just ahead. The night outside seemed too quiet, too still, but it was their only chance. He shoved the door open, the hinges groaning in protest, and yanked Hannah out into the open air. The cold night pressed in around them like a blanket, thick with the smell of wet earth and the distant hum of the trees. The storm had died down, leaving behind only the residue of rain, but every drop on Ethan's skin felt like a reminder there was no turning back. "Hannah," Ethan said, his voice raw, "we're getting out of here. Do you hear me? We're going home." She didn't respond. Not at first. Her fingers trembled around the bear she still clutched like a lifeline. Her eyes were empty, distant, but for a fleeting moment there was something there, just a spark. A crack in the wall Alan had built around her. "Please, Hannah," he whispered, his voice breaking. "I need you to come back to me." For a second he thought he saw her eyes flicker, recognition sparking deep inside them. But then the spell shattered. She pulled back her hand, trembling, and took a hesitant step away. Ethan's heart sank, but he didn't stop. He reached for her again, more gently this time. His palm brushed hers, and for the first time her fingers relaxed. They didn't grip the bear so tightly. The small victory felt like a breath of fresh air. But then he heard it. A shout. Loud. Angry. No, Alan had followed them out. Ethan spun just in time to see the old man's face twisted with fury, his hands raised. The shotgun gleamed in the moonlight. It was now or never. Ethan didn't wait. He yanked Hannah toward the truck. "Get in," he shouted, his voice ragged, his grip unrelenting. Hannah stumbled, but her hand gripped his wrist with a desperate strength. Her eyes locked onto his, clearer, now more present. For the first time in years, Ethan felt hope. He shoved her into the passenger seat, slamming the door behind her. Then in one fluid motion he jumped into the driver's seat, slammed the key into the ignition and floored the gas pedal. The truck roared to life, and they were off. Behind them the shack disappeared into the misty darkness. The nightmare that had held them captive for so long, finally fading into the rearview mirror. But Ethan knew this wasn't the end. Not yet. There were more answers to find, more truths to uncover, and the path ahead would be long and dangerous. But for now he had his sister, and that was enough. The truck sped down the rain-slicked road tires, kicking up water as Ethan's hands gripped the wheel knuckles white. The hum of the engine filled the cabin, a dull roar that almost drowned out the quiet in the passenger seat. But it couldn't drown out the truth. They had escaped, but the fight was far from over. Hannah sat silently beside him, the bear still clutched to her chest. Her eyes were wide, but distant, as if her mind was still lost in the dark places that Alan had carved into it. Ethan glanced at her, his heart aching. "You're safe now," he whispered, though he wasn't sure if she could hear him. The rain streaked down the windshield, distorting the view, blurring the road ahead. For a moment everything seemed uncertain again, as though the storm hadn't truly passed. Ethan's chest tightened. But then, without warning, a small voice, barely a whisper, broke the silence. "Ethan." His heart leapt. He turned to her, eyes wide. "Yeah, kiddo." Hannah looked up, the barest flicker of recognition in her eyes. Slowly she spoke again, her voice fragile but growing stronger. I'm okay." And in that moment, Ethan knew they'd both survived. For now, that was enough.